Welcome to the Monday Review episode, I think it's episode 7, a video where I look back at the weekend's racing and offer my opinion and the observations that I have going forward. Of course, it's just my opinion, other opinions are entirely valid, but just what might shape my thinking for the winter season ahead. So we'll start on Saturday at Ascot and the Novice Chase, which was won by Chianti Classico. If you follow any of my stuff, you'll perhaps know that Chianti Classico was a novice chaser that I put up as a horse to follow this season. He really impressed on debut at Chepstow, and this on paper looked a bit like a penalty kick, just two other rivals. He went off 4 to 5 on, but jumping the first fence, it was pretty obvious immediately that he wasn't entirely comfortable on this quicker ground. His jumping, which was dynamic and really a useful weapon at Chepstow, was nullified really at Ascot and was moderate at best. I thought Dave Bass actually did a very good job just to keep him in contention and nurse him round and get the job done up the home straight. He ultimately only put Scrumdiddly away by just under a length, but he was conceding £19 to that horse, and I think Scrumdiddly himself might be quite progressive, and I just think he simply didn't enjoy this quicker ground. So I've lost no faith in him whatsoever. I'm sure you'll see him wait now for a little bit of softer ground. Going right-handed shouldn't be an issue. He's won at Wincanton at Market Rasen, but I just think that quicker ground perhaps found out this big, strong, staying chaser. So wait for a bit of softer ground and keep following him. He's a horse of immense potential, and I've lost no faith in him whatsoever. Moving on to the 1965 chase, where we were hoping to see Shishkin put forward his credentials for the King George and indeed maybe the Gold Cup up against a very solid yardstick in Pic D'Orou. And sadly, it failed to materialise. It was pretty obvious down at the start that Shishkin was pretty disinterested. They got him moving forward, but they couldn't let them go. It had to take another circle, and it was pretty obvious then that he really wasn't fancying it, and Julie didn't jump off with the assistant starter waving her arms because the rule makers have decided that the bullwhip, which, let's be clear, they crack behind them to make a loud noise, they don't lay on the horse, has been removed. I suspect for that horrible word, optics. But of course, a race is also an optic, and I'm sure racing, having an optic of Shishkin against Pic D'Orou round Ascot would have been far more beneficial for the sport than an optic of Shishkin trotting home under Nico de Boinville. But that's just the crazy world we live in, unfortunately, and hopefully someone's gonna grab hold of this and make it all make sense, because for me it's all a bit of a nonsense, but there we are. As what you do with Shishkin, I just don't know. Nicky Henderson was clearly at a loss to explain it and was embarrassed and upset. You know, Luke Harvey had to work quite hard to get an interview with him. I saw some people sort of criticise Luke for accosting Nicky Henderson. Well, as far as I'm concerned, Luke Harvey's just doing his job, and quite rightly so. And unfortunately, with horses, you have to front up to the good things and the bad. They say that he's not shown any signs of it at home, and I have no reason to think they wouldn't be telling the truth, but it did, when you start to think about it, maybe make sense that he was having cheek pieces on first time out, when he could have perhaps been a bit fresh and a bit keen, and you might save the cheek pieces for later in the season, but I don't know. Either way, Nicky Henderson straight away drew a line to the fact that the start goes away from home as it does at Kempton. That sounds like he's maybe already thinking that he doesn't want to go to Kempton for the King George. Be a great shame. I'd love to see him go up to Newcastle next weekend alongside Constitution Hill and go for the rehearsal chase. Won under a big weight last year by L'Empresse, so it can be done. It wouldn't be a particularly Henderson thing to do, but they've got to get a run into him somewhere, and if Newcastle has the start in the right place, then maybe all is not lost. But that said, it's clearly a horse that's starting to question whether he's in love with the game, and that's never a good sign, unfortunately, for all, but he's clearly a very talented performer. Going on then to the younger horses in the Coral Hurdle, and Blueking D'Oroux got up late up the home straight to win this, probably going away. Now his form from Cheltenham last time was actually franked on Friday by the David Pipe horse that had finished behind him at Cheltenham, running another good race up in grade off a higher weight back in third, I think it was, on Friday. Blueking D'Oroux is clearly a horse going places, turned his form around last year after a wind up. This trip, 2 mile, 3.5, looked like it was the bare minimum. He just about got there, having got outpaced, albeit on quicker ground. So maybe as you go into the winter, sort of this intermediate trip on softer ground might well suit him. But it could just be that come the spring, he's a bit of a lurker in the stayers hurdle market. He is only young, perhaps a little bit inexperienced for that sort of race, but he's certainly a progressive horse, and I'm sure has been bought with chasing in mind, so is sure to be minded this year, whatever they do with him. But it was a decent performance in a fairly moderate race for the grade. Goshen, a great disappointment under Niall Houlihan, but on that quicker ground, and Goshen has been a bit in and out, as has the Gary Moore yard. So he might have his day yet back when the really wet ground comes. The Jim Barry Hurst handicap chase was one of the more painful races for me of the weekend. Segal was flagged up as a handicap mover and shaker to follow after his run last time, where he'd stayed on remarkably well despite racing far too keenly. Fred Arms was also flagged up from his last run. I came down on the side of Segal actually just because they were claiming 5 off Fred Arms, and I think Tristan Durrell, promising no years, is perhaps still got a bit to learn, and £5 wouldn't, to my mind, necessarily represent value. It looked like I got it right going to the last. Segal jumped it beautifully and then seemed to take a step and knuckle over. Boot Hill came through to pick up the pieces. Good piece of training by Harry Fry to win 2 big handicaps with that horse. They've planned his campaign out very well, but it definitely felt like it was one that got away with Segal. Hopefully that's not dented his confidence. He looked a much better horse, ridden more patiently, waited with early and settled. Hopefully he's got a big day in him yet. I'm sure he's a talented horse. Up to Haydock then for their big card of the year. Edwardstone got the Skelton's Day off to a very good start, running out a wide margin winner on his second start. I just highlight this just to point out that Dan Skelton has been pretty vocal in the media in the last sort of week, 10 days, that he's struggled because of the weather to get these horses fit first time out, and the number of horses from his yard that are taking giant steps forward from their first run to their second. Edwardstone, I think the race fell apart, but he was mighty impressive. He's an out-and-out 2-miler on soft ground. Takes a while to get rolling normally, but Harry Skelton took the race by the scruff of the neck going down the back straight, and it was never in danger from there on in, really. Used similar tactics on Grey Dawning in the intermediate chase following, where they put away Gaillard de Menil, who was a terrible price, I thought. You know, he's a 4-mile horse that was running over 2.5 miles around a sharp track first time out. Grey Dawning served it up to him down the back straight and got him on the stretch, and was, again, never really in danger. Going forward, Grey Dawning's jumping just slightly concerned me. He dived away to his left a couple of times and got a little bit low at 1 or 2. On an undulating track, I would just be a bit concerned about him, but around the likes of maybe Warwick or indeed back up to Haydock, places like that, I'm sure he's a horse that they'll have a plan for, but wasn't completely blown away by him. I thought Apple Away back in third ran a really nice chase debut. Pretty stiff introduction for chasing for this mare, but I thought she jumped really well. She jumped a little bit big and perhaps a little bit careful, but that's not a bad thing on your first chase start. This trip would have been short enough for her. Her best form over hurdles was over 3 miles. I'm sure she'll step forward, and I think come the spring she'll be a big player wherever they send her, whether that be Cheltenham or whether they wait for Aintree again. So certainly no faith lost in her whatsoever. Then the Stayers handicap hurdle, Slate Lane came over for Emmet Mullins. Oh, it's so obvious in hindsight, isn't it? Emmet Mullins in a UK handicap with a progressive horse, really well ridden by Donna Myler, got to the front, ran his own fractions, stayed on powerfully. It's a bit of a concern to hear that the horse had quite a nasty overreach on pulling up, and Emmet Mullins was apparently pretty concerned about it. So let's hope that he's back on the racecourse soon. It was a decent performance, and again, Emmet Mullins just proves that he's a target trainer extraordinaire, and when will we learn just to follow Emmet Mullins in handicap hurdles on this side of the Irish Sea? Crambo was perhaps a little bit disappointing, flagged up at 8-1 on the handicap movers and shakers, an anti-post bet. I'm glad to hear that some of you collected anti-post each way. I didn't. I was a win bet only. And I think given the chance again, Conor Brace and maybe Fergal O'Brien, you know, some of these jockeys are riding to instruction, would perhaps elect to be a little bit further forward. And he did travel sort of 4 wide around bends at time, which perhaps wasn't ideal. Coming up the home straight, switch from the outside to the inside. It was just a bit of a mess. Plenty throwing stones at Conor Brace, and I do understand that. If you've had a financial investment, you want to see your horse get a fair cut of it, and I don't think he did. But the big runner handicap. You know, Conor Brace is a developing jockey. He's ridden well on plenty of times this season, and these jockeys are only going to get good in these grader races by given the opportunity. And like everything, we all learn more from our failings than we do from our successes. I certainly learn more when I have a bad bet than I do when I have a good bet. So I think Conor Brace needs to cut a little bit of slack. Crambo is still a horse to follow. Does sound like they're going to go per temps route. He's probably pretty exposed now in terms of the Twitter punting public knowing him, but I could see the appeal for him in the per temps, and I wouldn't put him off if they went to the stayers, for all that he might just lack that touch of class. Then the big race of the day, the Betfair Chase, won by Royale Pagaille, who was well backed in the moments before the race. Protektorat, he's just never a horse I've liked or enjoyed following. I don't think I've ever had any of my hard-earned cash on him. He ballooned a couple of fences. I saw a few people say what a wonderful ride he must be. Well, their description of wonderful is different to mine. He just looks erratic at best. He launches at some, he runs into others. He just is all over the place and just looks thoroughly numb. I remember him winning with Bridget Andrews at Aintree, and he hung horrifically. He just looked numb the whole way around. Doesn't look like a nice ride at all. I think it shows that it was a very weak renewal he won last year. I think his Gold Cup level is about as good as he is. They're talking about bringing him back in trip, but I think truthfully they don't quite know what they want to do with him, and this was his Gold Cup, and it's gone awry. Now, whether he'll follow the Dan Skelton sort of theme this year and improve for his second run might well be the case, but he does seem to be a horse they think is best fresh. So he's certainly not one that will appear on my radar. He was disappointing, but truthfully, I never really fancied him for the race. Royale Pagaille, I thought, got given a really good ride by Charlie Deutsch, who came wide down the back straight and engaged Darryl Jacob on Bravemansgame early, looking to expose that weak finishing effort that he'd shown at Wetherby. Bravemansgame jumped well and I think was just outstayed. I've seen lots of people say that he's maybe not as good since his Gold Cup second, and I can see why you would think that. For me, it's very difficult because I had him all last year, opposed him, said that he didn't really truly stay 3 miles. And of course, Wetherby this year and Haydock now back that up. So we're always very guilty of sort of wanting to positively enforce our own bias. But I'm simply wrong. He does stay further than 3 miles because he stayed in the Gold Cup. He perhaps didn't stay as well as Bravemansgame from the back of the last up the hill, but the Gold Cup is 3¼ miles, so he almost certainly stays 3 miles very well. He just hasn't hit that form in his last 2 runs. He had a wind up before the start of last season, so whether his wind is catching him out, I'm just not quite so sure. But I also just don't believe this was the plan for Paul Nicholls. I think the fact that Harry Skelton was sent down to Ascot tells you that Paul Nicholls didn't want to run the horse here. I think this is owner-led. And when you watch the interview with Paul Nicholls after the race, he doesn't seem as sort of angst as he normally does. Normally, if he's beaten, he's a pretty sort of angry internal man, and he seemed pretty sort of sanguine about it and said, "Well, yeah, we got beaten by a better horse, and we'll go onwards." You read his Racing Post preview, stable tour of the year, and he said he wants to have Bravemansgame fresh, and the Charlie Hall was the perfect springboard to the King George last year. They'd like to do the same. I just don't think this was the trainer's plan. I think they've got a big task now to get him back for the King George. And now, talking to the King George, I, for what it was worth, would have backed Shishkin against Bravemansgame before this weekend. I think you've got to really be concerned about Shishkin now. You obviously got to be concerned about Bravemansgame. So where does that leave the King George picture? Well, I think if Allaho comes over, he's going to go off a very short price favourite. But will they bring him over? He's had an internal injury, a spleen injury. I don't think his return at Cork told us an awful lot. I think he had a sort of nice canter round, wasn't put under a lot of pressure. And will Willie Mullins like to keep him at home and just travel him short distances and try and build him back up to go and reclaim his Ryanair crown, which is surely the target they've got. Then you talk about Lon Presse, who was talk of him perhaps going to Tingle Creek, but it seemed to be that the whispers coming out of Haydock at the weekend were that they're a little bit behind schedule and might even struggle to get him back for the King George. If they do, they're going to the King George, perhaps off no prep run, and he did jump out to his left last year. That's what cost him, so he wouldn't be for me. Which brings me to Edwardstone, who was 50 to 1 when I started formulating this plan on Saturday. He's now a best price 40 to 1, but he's a dual grade 1 winner. He stayed 2 mile 4 at Aintree in the grade 3 handicap hurdle a couple of seasons ago, and certainly wasn't stopping then. It's always looked like a strong stayer. He's got great form right-handed, won the Tingle Creek obviously last year. Just reminds me a little bit of Edwardstone Blur, a sort of 2-miler that got more stamina as they got older. Good solid jumper. I think this looks like it could be his target, because he's undoubtedly not quick enough now. He was well put away by John Bon on his reappearance in the Schlur Chase. I think this could be the target for Edwardstone, and at 40 to 1, I certainly am very interested in having a few pound on him. So I'd encourage you, if you've got a few pound to bank after the weekend, following some of the SBK tips or the tip I put up yesterday, maybe reinvest a little bit of this anti-post on Edwardstone, who's at a best price 40 to 1 for the King George. Going on to Punchestown on the Saturday, Gaelic Warrior made a really impressive chase debut. Now, obviously, going right-handed at Punchestown is much the best for him, but I was really impressed with his jumping. He ran very free in the early part of the race, but what was nice was that his jumping wasn't erratic. His jumping matched his stride pattern and his stride volition, just jumped away. Very big, very bold. He leaned a little bit onto the 5th from home, which is coming downhill, and he was perhaps a little bit on his shoulders and a little bit long, and he slightly pitched at it, but was pretty smart to get his landing gear out. Didn't look like a big mistake. And then Paul Townend was able to take advantage of the fact that he was about a furlong clear. Not necessarily power down, but just grab hold of him up the home straight and get him in a bit tighter to the base of the fence and teach him to pop away. And he was really measured and very intelligent. I think he's the best novice chaser I've seen so far this season. I take on board the fact that there is perhaps a concern that his jumping might be exaggerated over a fence, jumping out to the right like he's done at times at Cheltenham on the left-handed track. But the bottom line is he ran Impere Pass pretty close last year in the 2.5 mile novice hurdle at Cheltenham. That horse we know is staying over hurdles. I find it very difficult to see that there's anything that's going to come out and run to a better level than him. And it could just be that fences straighten him up. I mean, it's an unknown. I certainly would have no hesitation in backing Gaelic Warrior for a novice chase at Cheltenham Festival Anti-Post, if only I would know which race Willie Mullins will go for. And unfortunately, that's the shame of Anti-Post these days. Willie Mullins has the plethora of stars, but you don't really know where they're going to go until much nearer the time. So Gaelic Warrior for me is the standout novice of the year so far, but you have to sit on your hands and wait to see where they might take him. He spoke about bringing him back in trip to 2 miles. I think that's unlikely, but it just shows you that you just couldn't second guess the great man at all. Flooring Porter was disappointing, but again, this is like Gaelic Warrior. This is the right way around for Gaelic Warrior. This is completely the wrong way around for Flooring Porter on Sunday. Jumped out to his left, had no chance whatsoever. Personally, he's not on my radar for the novice chase at the Cheltenham Festival. I just think you'll find pacier rivals that will perhaps cause him to get out of a rhythm. But if you do like him, don't lose faith on him on this one run. Stick with him if you've already been keen on him. Stateman returned with the facile win in the Morgiana hurdle. He didn't really have to be at his best, but I thought it was interesting after the race that they ventured that perhaps he wasn't at his best behind Constitution Hill at Cheltenham last year, and with him and Impere Pass, they would go to Cheltenham for the champion hurdle and try not to let Constitution Hill have its all his own way, which is fighting talk at least, and hopefully might mean that we get a slightly more exciting champion hurdle than we're perhaps predicting at the moment. Yesterday at Punchestown, Tullyhill was turned over at, I think it was 1-8 on. If you were betting in running, you'd have been laying him for plenty, I would think, throughout the race, because he just couldn't jumped like he had lead shoes on. If he was long, he was very cold and sort of timid, and if he was in tight, he was very slow and cumbersome and sort of jumped with pretty straight legs. It was a pretty underwhelming hurdling debut by all accounts. He's going to have to go back and learn to jump. If the engine is there, then that's one thing. But if you keep losing momentum and energy trying to get away from hurdles, having landed in a heap, it's no good to you whatsoever. Tullyhill is certainly a horse that I won't be following at all until I see his jumping sharpen up. And then the John Durkin itself and the Fastorslow Galopin Des Champs rematch which went the way of Fastorslow. And he is definitely fast, he is definitely not slow. Appreciate it, looked a rejuvenated character, making the running over this trip under Patrick Mullins, who was good and positive on him. And it looked for a moment like he'd perhaps given the field the slip turning in. But Galopin Des Champs loomed up, Fastorslow switched to the inside, which was a good move, I thought. And just showed that the better turn of foot up the home straight, in which I think the times will show turned into a dash. Galopin Des Champs looked to get a little bit hampered. Paul Townend didn't know whether he wanted to come on the outside or the inside. That maybe cost him a length, but it certainly didn't cost him defeat. The bigger concern for him was that his jumping was pretty sluggish in the early stages. And Paul Townend reported that he didn't travel with any zest. There is, of course, always that danger. If you think back to him as a novice, he was this very free-going, bold, jumping novice. And they've obviously had to do a lot of work settling him down. And a bit like a pendulum, when you're trying to change something, you know, too hot, too cold, just right, it might just be that they've perhaps overdone the settling work and this horse has switched off a little bit. I've seen lots of talk that the Gold Cup finishes horses, and of course there are the stats that back that up. But actually, he was only a 7-year-old when he won the Gold Cup. 7-year-olds that win a Gold Cup do have a better record than older horses of winning a Gold Cup coming back again. So if you're with Galopin Des Champs, certainly wouldn't be put off by one poor run around Punchestown in the John Durkan. It could just be that Punchestown's not his track. Yes, he won this last year, but he was not as impressive as he was later on in the season. So certainly don't go make any rash decisions just yet. Wait for Leopardstown. But for all, it does show that he's not invincible. He's not this wonder horse that we thought he perhaps was when he pulled up at Cheltenham back in March. So again, that makes the Gold Cup picture a little bit more open. I could see an argument for Shishkin at 20 to 1. You know, the starter's in the right place. If he can go and prove that actually when he jumps off, he enjoys his racing, there's a little bit of appeal there at 20 to 1, but I think you've got to sit tight and wait and see what he does now in his next start. L'Empresse is definitely a better horse left-handed. I think the Gold Cup would be far more suitable for him than the King George. But given that it sounds like they're behind schedule, and given that when he arrived at Venetia Williams, he'd already had a leg injury, I think it's not a certainty that they'll get him back on track. And if they do, that he'll be quite the horse he was. So for me, it was Corach Rambler, who finished third in the Betfair Chase, looked to get outpaced early, so his jumping wasn't as slick, just going that gear quicker. But I'm minded that the connections felt that Kelso perhaps wasn't his track and was quite a sharp track. Well, the new Haydock is also quite sharp. I don't think that's his track either. I was really taken by how well he finished behind Royale Pagaille and Bravemansgame. Now, of course, Royale Pagaille's been well beaten in a couple of Gold Cups, so the bare line of the form would need improving on. But we know, with 2 seasons of form to look at, that Corach Rambler is at his best in the spring, and he is pretty much at his best around Cheltenham. 4 runners wouldn't have suited him. He's a better horse in a bigger field when Derek Fox can switch him in and out of horses, and he can come through past tired horses, very much like Galopin Des Champs did last year. So around about 40 to 1, I've had a little investment on Corach Rambler in the Gold Cup picture. It's yet to be confirmed that they will go there. They might try and mind him and go to the Grand National, but I think they'll try this. I think the Gold Cup would be far too appealing to turn down, and I can just see the appeal of him against horses that are perhaps not looking quite what we thought they were. So that's a wrap up of the weekend that was, the Monday review. I'll be back tomorrow with some more handicap movers and shakers, and I will get up later this week a video from the steward's room. Enjoy your week, and I'll see you soon.